Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Welcome to another great episode here at IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Cherokee Boos, and today we'll be looking at Project Plus. Specifically, we're going to be looking at our project properties. And we have Mr. Ronnie Wong to go ahead and help us with that. Thank you for coming, Ronnie.
Thank you for having me back on the show as we continue on to see some of the elements that we need to understand if we're going to be involved in project management of any sort. Now, here when we start talking about the Project Plus level, remember that we're really taking the initial steps to get entry and to get an understanding, a foundational understanding of project management. But that means we have to start at the very beginning as well. And sometimes it's hard to kind of just jump into the topic when you might be just told, hey, you're going to be a project manager.
Yeah. So exactly what is a project, Ronnie? And then how do we actually begin? Like, what's the purpose of creating a project?
Whenever we start taking a look here at the idea of what a project really is, and that's something we want to make sure that we focus in on, what does this do? What does a project do that regular work does not do for us? And that's where we really begin. The total focus of a project is that it is a temporary endeavor first and foremost. And that means that there is going to be a very solid beginning to this project, and that there's going to be, of course, an established end to the project as well. Now, not only do we have that as far as a time limit goes, but it has some type of goal that happens in which we take whatever it is, tools and techniques and whatever we do to make sure that we end up creating something, okay? Something that is unique. And that something that's unique can either be a product, it can be some type of service, or it can be some type of result that we're hoping to achieve in the end. It's not normally just one thing. Okay? So when we start to take a look then at this idea of why do we need it, well, we actually need projects to exist because, well, there's several factors here that we have to think about. One is fairly easy. Whatever it is that we think that we need, we probably might have actually done a search for it, and we realize something. It doesn't yet exist at any particular time. So what we're doing here is we are filling the gap in which we tried to look for it, and all of a sudden we realize it's not within the environment that we can actually find right now, or we don't see it actually existing somewhere else. So at this particular point, you might have tried to purchase it and you realize you can't purchase it. You might have tried to find something that's actually out there and it couldn't be found. Or it may be something that's so unique, it just hasn't been thought about yet in the context that you're doing. Don't get me wrong, you actually understand that there's tons of stuff out there, and more than likely what you need does exist. You're just not able to find it at that particular point. So at that point, you may find that out, is that, hey, I need a project to help me to create this unique value of whatever it is that I'm producing.
So would that be something that you might do in-house, or is that typically outsourced?
Well, it just depends on what you need to create, right? So depending on your product, you might find some different things or whatever result that you want. So let's take a look at my screen here just for a moment to help us to make sure that we have at least the basic facts concrete in our head before we move on here, okay? So remember that it's a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. Let me give you some examples here so that we understand what we might be talking about. As far as a product goes, let's talk about the idea of men's razors. Now, I'm pretty sure, Cherokee, I'm not going to say that you use a men's razor, but what I'm going to say is this, right? The very fact is men's razors have been around for a long time, okay? And you might be looking at it and going, why is that a product? That's not anything that's really unique into itself. So why would you have this listed as a project here? Well, in this instance, it's the way that we've chosen to advance the idea of razor blade technology, right? So when I grew up, there was really only the Bic razor, okay? And it had one blade on it and it had a yellow handle. That was a disposable razor at that point. So I came along in that era where disposable razors were just really getting popular. But, before that, it was just those razors that you bought and you kind of had this metal handle and everything, and then you did that. But overall, though, as the technology advanced, now today you have 5 razors. You have 5 razors that have lubricant on it and
they
gels.
even vibrate to get closer to the skin.
Yeah, and you name it, all that. The idea there is that it took a project for somebody to say, look, I want a closer shave, and so these companies did what? They formed a project to go, all right, how do we get a better razor? A razor is already a razor, which is like the sharpest thing that that I know that I would have in my house. So how do you actually get something sharper that gives you a closer blade? Well, it took a project before they realized, well, look, what if I start adding 2 razors?
Now, Ronnie, you keep using this term project, but how would a project really differ from a program?
Yeah. When it comes down to the nature of a program and a project really do kind of go hand in hand. But a lot of times here, what happens is that whatever project that you're working on eventually ends up in a program. A program is ongoing work, something that has procedures that we tend to follow on a day-by-day basis here. And after a while, that project essentially is the result, and then whatever is carried on in which we tend to make money off of at the end, or we tend to use on a daily basis, that is what actually begins to become a program as well when you start looking at something. So the idea here is, if we take our razor blade as an example, the idea of producing that razor, okay, whatever it is, 5 blades, vibrating with the lubricating gel that heats up and, made of a magnum core, whatever it might be.
Right, super fancy.
Yeah, super fancy razor. Well, the production behind that, the program behind that now is manufacturing. Is the ability to market that and continue to market that as being the best razor on the market. You name it, that's what we have as far as projects and products going hand in hand when you start to see the difference here to do that.
So as far as some reasons to actually start a project, maybe I do have this product or service, and I see that there is a need to go ahead and improve. Would that be a good reason to go ahead and begin and start a project?
Yeah, projects normally start just based off of anything. Like what we were saying here really at the beginning, right? It might be something that you go, I can improve on that, okay? It might be something you just haven't seen before, so that's another one that you have. You might also end up recognizing that, hey, the solutions that are out there just are not good enough. So you might find yourself with multiple reasons to actually go ahead and do something like this as well. Now, when we start mentioning that idea of projects and making sure that we understand, the key that makes that project itself, whatever it is, whether it's a product or a result or a service or whatever it is here, is actually going to be, well, limited by 3 what we call constraints in terms of project management. And that is limited resources, limited time, as well as limited cost. In other words, you don't have unlimited cost to do whatever you want to. You have a budget that you have to set. There's a time period for you to develop whatever this is. If it's the brand new razor blades, they told you, hey, I want to get this out to market before my competitor comes ahead of me. And so what's my time limit going to be? It's going to be the next 4 months. Okay? So it might be something like that. And then, of course, resources. Well, how many people are you going to allow me to make sure that I work on something like this as well? So products are usually the first thing that we think about, but remember that it can actually extend to the idea of services as well as results that we tend to see as well. So let me go back and talk about this idea of services and results just briefly too. Okay? With something like a service, you can actually take a look at, well, just at IT Pro TV itself. It's not that we believe that we were just the best people on market, even though we are, okay? But it's not that. Okay, the idea here is that we believe that we could offer a unique service in the field of IT training, especially certification training. And so we came up with a project that said, we're going to start IT Pro TV. And that's pretty much what it actually ended up doing. So in that sense, we're competing in the marketplace, but we actually said we can do it differently, we can do it a little bit better. So we chose to do that. The other thing, of course, is the idea of a result that can happen as well. IT Pro TV recently recently underwent a move here where we're now moved into a larger facility so that we can produce more content. And the end result of that move was to actually have more studios that went up so that we can produce more content. And at the end of the day, that's what ultimately is the goal, is that result is that even though we were doing fine in 2 studios, we actually wanted to go ahead and say,
improve, evolve.
Yep, and to grow,
right,
to actually do more and more content. So it took a project for someone to say, hey, we need to move from 2 to 5, and then here's what we need in every studio, and here's how all that comes together. And so there was a project management team that actually ended up taking that on. And so when you start taking a look at all these together, that's where all of a sudden you start seeing the idea of a project as having very tangible results, such as a product behind you or even a service, or maybe something a little bit more intangible, such as results. In the very end, that you hope, because you don't know until you try it, is that you'll actually end up getting the result that you want to. So just realize that overall, though, when you start to talk about the fundamentals here and the basic understanding of the properties of a project, there's a lot more to it than just saying, oh, it's, it's something that we do. It actually does have a little bit more involved into that, and usually it's again constrained by that idea of time, cost, as well as the requirements or the scope of the entire project. Okay? All right, so as we continue to take a look at this particular aspect of it, we've also talked about the idea of a program, and what makes this different is, well, what we have here is that projects can exist in several different formats. By itself, it can be a project that exists and something brand new starts. IT Pro TV is essentially a good example of that. It didn't exist before, it started, and now we exist as the outcome of that particular project of where IT Pro TV began. I now work here as one of the actual show hosts right here on IT Pro TV.
You get paid for this?
And I do get paid for it, believe it or not. It's kind of strange too, yes, I understand. But overall though, when we start doing that, now I'm actually in that program working for IT Pro TV to do so. So we start to see where this is a changeover, and this is what starts happening. So a lot of projects end up as a program after everything is done that started the initial result of this. Now, the other thing, of course, then, is project can end up in a portfolio for other people as well. So a great example of that is actually the IT Pro TV studios that's going on right here. Okay? Now, what do I mean by that? Well, when we actually decided that this is the studios that we were going to build our brand new studios, perfectly fine that we did so, but we actually hired a team that actually said, all right, here's what needs to be done, and here's what we're going to do. And it's not that I had to come in and actually mount all these cameras up and do everything. It was a whole team of people, and they now can actually say at the end of that entire project, when everything is finally wrapped up and all to the end, that we now become what we call, of course, a project in our portfolio. In other words, it now becomes a thing. I know that's the worst word to put it. I keep saying the word project.
I understand. It's a way to validate that company's experience. They say, look, this is what I've done. These are the photos. The studios look great. And then we're part of their portfolio in a sense.
It really is. It's something in which we really do become part of for another team. So projects, you find them just about everywhere. Normally people like that idea of the portfolio because it allows for somebody to come in and go, well, can you really do that project? Well, now they can point to us as a portfolio. So
yeah, I've already done it. Ask Ronnie.
Yeah, ask Ronnie whether or not it can actually be done that way. Sure it can. So that's what we generally end up taking a look at as well. When you start seeing where projects normally exist in the world today too, when you start having to deal with them, overall. Now, we want to make sure that there's a clear distinction here between that idea of a project and program, and I've kind of muddled it a little bit by telling you that projects begin and they normally end as programs overall, okay? But in this sense, when we start to do something like this, we have to then, of course, be able to distinguish that idea of that program. And remember that programs tend to have some type of procedure and repetitive task that they have and existing things that they have to actually end up doing. So, for example, when we start taking a look at a program that makes it different from a project, you might take, let's say, not the idea of creating a brand new baseball, okay? So let's say that somebody says, oh, look, baseballs, we can make them faster, and that would take a project for somebody to actually be able to take that and go, here it is. We're going to make a brand new baseball that's going to be used in Major League Baseball so that pitchers can actually have more distinguished types of pitching that they want. Well,
I thought you were going to say it has LEDs and blinky lights.
It could be LEDs and blinky lights that might actually distract the batter. That is true. Yeah, no doubt that could happen. But it could be where somebody says that's the project they want to undertake, and they start developing that. But the manufacturing of the baseballs is more of a program, right? So once they actually get that idea and that concept in mind, it's not that, building a brand new baseball, hopefully nobody would ever do that, but people will probably end up doing that at some point in time. That is something that would be akin to what we call a program. The same thing when it comes down to even teaching of concepts, such as teaching algebra in high school, okay? Now, that in itself is not that you're inventing algebra to teach, but you're now part of a program that actually says what? You're teaching algebra in high school as well. And so you're actually doing that as a repetitive and daily task that you have. And even housekeeping services in something like a hotel would be more of a program. Now, if you were inventing like new housekeeping services, like a super concierge type of service or whatever the next level of housekeeping might be, well, that would be one thing. But programs tend to be everywhere when you start to do that as well. Okay. So those are keys for us in understanding that then. And so the great thing is this actually gives me a chance then to quiz Cherokee on just a couple of
Yay!
different things that we can kind of point out here to see what's happening, okay? So Cherokee, one of the key aspects, okay, that we might end up facing on the exam is something that's fairly simple, which is to be able to distinguish the difference between a project and a program. So if you kind of remember how we described a project, you got to remember the idea of that temporary endeavor, you know, and the idea of the constraints.
Program being repetitive.
Yeah, and program
Continuous.
being repetitive.
Okay, all right,
And having
let's see how
something
we
like
do.
that. So let me kind of give you some examples here and let's see what you can do, okay? So if you are actually a service contractor for landscaping, would that be a program or would that be a project?
Okay, so from what I've gathered, it seems like if I were trying to invent a new type of, I don't know, fertilizer to grow my yard, know something new and impressive, then it would be more of a project. But here in Florida, it rains, we have sunshine. Unfortunately, the grass keeps growing, which would require a repetitive service that would fall under program.
Yeah, it kind of bears out like that, right? Now, what if Cherokee, instead of saying the idea here of creating some brand new type of what did you say, soil? Is that
Yeah,
what it said?
fertilizer.
Fertilizer. Instead of actually trying to create something like that scientifically in a you know, a lab somewhere, what if she said, I was actually the landscape designer and that we had just, you know, that a golf course had just hired her to design what? The entryway landscape. Would that
Okay.
be a project?
I think that would fall under project,
Yeah.
yes. It's a temporary endeavor.
Yeah, because you're going to end up designing the project, and once that's over, you might actually have to do it, depending on, you know, whether or not this is your company or not. But it may be where you go, all right, so now I've designed it, it's been approved, we now start to implement it, and in that sense, it now becomes your program to do what? To carry out, to finish everything. But if you were just asked to design it, that could be the idea of a project.
And then I could take photos and incorporate it into my portfolio.
That is actually true. You could end up doing that. So yeah, very good when we start to see issues like that. But you do want to take a look at some of the examples that you might end up seeing and distinguish them because of the way, or in the terms in which we described it. All right, so let's try another one here, Cherokee. All right. So if you are now hired instead to teach, let's say algebra, either in high school or you might actually hear the term upper school, well, what do you think? Would that be a project or a program at this point?
Well, since this was actually one of the examples you had given us, I was paying attention. Ronnie did say that that would be an example of a program.
Okay, so what makes it a program, Cherokee?
Well, the fact that we have a pre-existing methodology and we're just continually teaching, it makes it repetitive in that sense.
All right, so let's change that idea, that teaching element up, because that can be a little bit tricky, okay? So let's say instead, Cherokee, since you actually do work in IT, that instead my company were to hire you to do a 2-month training on Office 365 so that all my employees could get up to speed and working with Office 365 and make sure they know the ins and outs of it. You're still teaching. Would that be considered a program or a project at this point?
I think that because you've specifically given me a timeline, a time frame to complete my training, I would go ahead and consider that a project.
Yeah, I think that temporary endeavor is key, but also with that time span giving us a time limit as far as our constraint goes. And more than likely, that means that you're going to be budgeted so much money, and here's the requirement, is that my company is going to successfully migrate over to Office 365 if we're to do that. That indicates more of the idea of a project rather than teaching. And I pointed that out specifically because it's very easy to see one as being a program, like teaching, you know, at high school or a college or whatever course it is, and just teaching that, you know, as ongoing. But now notice this as a contractor, it might be something else like this as well. Okay? All right, so Cherokee, one more IT example here just because we're
Oh,
where we
no.
are. Okay? So
All right.
let's say instead that I hired you, though,
Okay.
to be a developer, okay, to develop specific Java programming for IT Pro TV.
Okay.
Would that be, what do you think? This time I didn't give you a time limit or anything.
Are we doing a specific project? Oh, I can't even say the word here, but let's say, what would be your goal for me and when you hire me?
Yeah. Some, let's just say, is a Java type of application that needs to run.
Okay. Then I'm going to go with a project here, because normally you would go ahead and code that particular element that you were requesting, and then the job would be finished.
Yeah. And so in that sense, yes, the job would be over. It doesn't mean that Cherokee's job couldn't end up evolving at that point inside that company to where we say, all right, Cherokee, you did such a great job. Here's another project. And we give her another project. Or we might just say, what? We need Cherokee on board full time. And so she just works as our Java programmer instead. Now, if I say that, right, if I say instead, Cherokee, we need to hire a Java programmer, well, you're now part of the IT Pro TV program instead. You're not part of a project anymore that's just trying to work on a particular, endeavor. Make sense?
Yeah, maintain and evolve and even improve the Java that we currently have for IT Pro TV.
Yeah, so at the very beginning and the foundations here, when we start seeing this idea of project properties, right? So it's really key that we understand, the goals that we have in place. Now, I want to kind of go backward just a little bit here to make sure that we understand just a couple of things and make sure that we point them out. And so I went ahead and typed them up on my screen so that we can see them just a little bit better and make sure that we talk about it as well. Okay, and then we've got just a little bit more that we need to cover to help us to get ready for the rest of our show that we'll have. All right, so remember that when it comes down to project management itself, the ultimate goal, right, is to deliver some unique product or service or result. Now, the key here is to remember that that can actually be tangible or it can be intangible, right? A product definitely is tangible. Usually something like services are definitely tangible as well. But there can be intangible results that it actually sets up success in the future if we need to. So it is very possible that we do that.
Yeah, looking at those tangible projects, I think it might, in some ways, be a little bit easier if you have those baseballs and you can see any kind of obvious defects or malfunctions. But when it comes to things like our services, sometimes that requires a little extra investigation, like our voice of the customer and some exploratory, and even like some prep ahead of time.
There's no doubt that there's actually along the process here where you'll have to actually, do a little bit of quality control and quality assurance here. So just realize that projects themselves don't necessarily mean that they're always successful. So even though we might have a result, the result could be a negative result. So let's say that Cherokee does hire me to do a project and to produce something, some product, and at the end of it, I hand it over to Cherokee, and Cherokee goes, Ronnie, that's junk. That's just a piece of junk. I don't want it at all. Well, the project still existed, and she now has something tangible in her hand that she can point out as being junk. But it is possible. So not every project ends successfully is my point here. Now, of course, better project management is going to help you to end this project successfully. At least that's what we're hoping for. But just kind of realize that's what we'll also see. Remember that intangible idea, too, is that it could be where we're setting up the project so that we can have better processes in the end as well. So it might be that we realize that for us to streamline something else, we need to actually establish a program. In other words, we have a project to establish a program. I know that's weird. That says that here's how we're going to do things to make it a little bit more streamlined. So in the end, we don't know if it's going to work until it actually works in true production here. So that is very possible. Okay. Now, the other thing that we want to point out here as a way of review as we take a look on my screen here is the idea of the temporary endeavor. Remember that there's a beginning and an established end. But notice this, okay? It doesn't indicate how long it's going to take. So that's kind of a weird concept, especially if you're very Western mind, we say it begins at 8 o'clock, it ends at 5 o'clock here. So for us, we just count up the hours in between, and we say that's how long the project's going to take. But projects don't tend to do that. We just say that there is going to be a definite beginning to the project and there's a definite end, but the duration itself could actually span over, well, it could be weeks, it could be hours, it could be days, it could be whatever it might be, because the idea of duration is not taken into account of a project, especially when you're trying to produce something unique. You don't know how long it's going to take unless you've already produced something fairly similar for maybe another company that you might even be able to estimate that. So the idea of a temporary one is also key too. Now, we've also talked about the constraints here, such as resources and quality, as well as time. So this also means that projects need to have scheduled work, okay, because what we'll end up finding out is that some work can be done in a certain order, some work has to be done in a certain order, or other work can't get done, so we'll see that as well. And also on resources too and quality, there has to be some type of assurance that it meets a minimum quality standard and requirement too. And then ultimately, of course, it's for some stakeholder satisfaction.
Now,
In other words,
Ronnie,
it's going to help us. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you there.
That's fine.
But for some of us, since we're just starting out here with our Project Plus, some of us might not be familiar with this term stakeholder. Could you kind of clue us in there?
Yeah, we're going to talk about this a little bit more in detail, but a stakeholder is somebody that has some type of interest in that project. And usually that interest has to deal with either money, okay, or they've invested some type of time. So in other words, they've given you money to start it, they've produced some type of time, they desire to see that project done, so they might even offer you some expert advice to doing this when you start seeing it. But that's what we start to take a look at, is that normally it actually is designed to meet somebody's satisfaction. So we don't just produce products and projects to just have products and projects here. We actually produce it because somebody's normally requested, and we hope it meets their goals. Now, here's a key statement that I want us to get to understand. The problem is understanding what the heck the satisfaction actually means here. So what we normally talk about at this point, let's take a look at my machine again, is the idea of what we call SMART goals here. Okay? So notice I talk about specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. And the way that we tend to do that is by using some type of worksheet. Okay? Now, I came up with this one on my own. There's plenty out there on the internet that you can just type in SMART goals worksheet, and you'll come up with them in all different designs. Here's the way I always envision it as far as a table goes, and I don't know why I do that, I just always do. So normally when you do start to say, hey, here's my overall project, okay, you might actually go ahead and print out this for every stakeholder, okay. What is it that must be done, okay? What are we actually trying to do? How do you know that you actually have accomplished it, okay? How do you know when everything has actually been achieved here? So you not only have measurable goals that you actually say, hey, I've actually hit that mark, you actually have to ask, is this possible? Okay? And then is it realistic? Can we actually do it? We might find out something, especially on this realistic one, that it's realistic for somebody else that has more resources than you do.
Right.
It might not be realistic for you that may not have as many resources
happens.
as well. And then ultimately timely here. So everybody might end up saying, all right, as they come together and start to do a product, and this is key, what you don't want is somebody saying, here it is, here's the product, and then Cherokee looking and going, well, that wasn't what I envisioned at all. I didn't have any of that in mind. And now you're going, well, I just spent $10,000 producing this, and now you're telling me it's not what you wanted, Cherokee. I'm going to be fairly upset if you do
Putting
something
it in
like
black and white just kind of solidifies and makes sure everyone's on the same page, no pun intended. But
Well, it really does. It helps to keep everything realistic, right? Because remember that there are people out there that they are dreamers, which is great.
Yeah.
Okay? And we love the idea
Nothing wrong
of
with
somebody
that.
dreaming about this. But in the end, we might find out something. That dream is unrealistic. Okay? It's not anywhere attainable. Okay? There's no way for us to measure that we can hit that particular dream mark that they have. And it's not very specific. If you tell me, I want you to design me a car that floats in the clouds. Well, what does that mean? What does something like that actually mean? What do you mean by floating in the clouds? How do you measure that? Is it okay if it only floats in other words, like if I produce a cloud at ground level, is that actually a car floating in the clouds at all? How do you define float at this point? Yeah, see, so there's a lot of those things.
Oh, it would make that rush hour traffic so much easier to deal with, that's for
Yeah,
sure.
see, and so now all of a sudden you go, I'm doing this for the idea of traffic, now you got to go, wait a minute, is that actually even manageable in Gainesville anywhere, regardless of whether you actually have a car
They'll find a way
floating
to
in the
stop
clouds?
it, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the goal and idea, is that normally you have something that's fairly, in other words, it's something that can be put down on paper, so that we can see it and that we can work with it a little bit better when we start to take a look at those ideas of being able to do that as well. So keeping all that in mind, when we start to take a look at the properties here, it really is helpful if we understand that all this is involved in what a project actually has in hand. But there's a problem though, Cherokee. Okay?
Oh, no.
And there always are problems, but that's what you and I are here to understand and do. projects, when they are at the dream level, okay, when they are at the very beginning, they're always this big, okay? Everybody can always turn it and see it and look at it and go, man, that's exactly what I want to produce, okay? When it hits the reality here in these SMART goals, when it starts to actually say, how can we do something like this? Now all of a sudden you find out it actually requires a project that has a project within it, that has multiple projects that actually help build that before you can actually build this. So in other words, projects are like weddings here, Cherokee. They only get bigger and they only get more complex if you don't manage them well. And that's what we're here to discover, is the way that we help to manage that by using project management tools and what we have out there as far as skills go. That's what's going to really help us to keep that from being a wedding, you know, that starts off with, oh, we're just going to have 2 people, and 6 weeks later it's 10. And you know, that nice little reception.
Yeah,
you know,
no,
that
we've
started
got
off with
photo
10.
booths and chocolate fountains.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
else.
and so now it's become a production. Well, projects can do the same thing. Project management is what helps us to keep that manageable. And so we've got a lot more tools and we've got a lot more techniques that we need to talk about. But overall, though, here's the beginning.
I think you've done a really good job, Ronnie. We've been able to look at the very concept and bringing our ideas to fruition with the process here, our Project Plus training. And I appreciate you coming today, and I appreciate all you folks. I think we're about time to wrap up here today. So thank you for joining us here at IT Pro TV. I'm Cherokee Boos.
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
Signing off.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.